The polished rocking chair creaked softly as my son and daughter-in-law smiled and handed me the note, "We're downsizing you." Still, I ran my fingers along the armrest, steady, letting them think I was grateful. As the wood settled under my touch, it sounded like years of decisions made without me. While that same creak filled the room, I realized the chair wasn't a gift, it was an eviction. The same hands that raised my son were now being pushed aside by his silence. That's when I wrapped the chair back up and returned it with something they never expected. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The Christmas lights twinkled softly in the living room, casting a warm glow that contrasted with the knot of tension tightening in Martha's chest. She sat in her favorite chair, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her home, but today it felt different. Her son Henry and his wife Susan were excitedly watching her unwrap the present they had chosen for her. Henry's face lit up as he handed her the package. "Go ahead, Mom, we thought you'd really like this." Martha carefully peeled back the festive paper, revealing a polished wooden rocking chair. It was beautiful, she had to admit, but something about it felt off. She looked at the note tucked beneath the ribbon and her heart sank as she unfolded it. "We're downsizing you." Her hands froze for a moment. The words felt like a slap and she could feel her breath catch in her throat. Henry, oblivious to the sudden tension, smiled brightly. "It's a nice chair, right? We thought it'd be perfect for your new, smaller place." Susan added, "You'll be much more comfortable in a smaller space. It's a new chapter, Mom." Martha set the note aside, not reacting immediately. Her mind raced. She couldn't believe this. A gift wrapped in the guise of kindness, yet underscored by their plan to move her into a smaller home. A chair, a new chapter, and yet what did it mean? It was their decision, not hers. They had already decided her future for her. She forced a smile, nodding. "It's very thoughtful," she murmured, though the words felt hollow. Susan's smile faltered slightly. "You'll love it, Mom. It's really for your own good. You won't need all this space anymore." Martha's heart ached, not because of the chair, but because of how easily they dismissed her. She had worked hard all her life to maintain her independence, yet here they were, making decisions without asking her once what she wanted. The chair wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol of how little they considered her autonomy. Joanne, her best friend who had been sitting quietly nearby, watched Martha closely. Joanne knew her better than anyone. She could see the hurt in Martha's eyes and the way she set the chair aside without a word. "Everything okay?" Joanne asked softly, her voice low enough to only reach Martha's ears. Martha blinked, forcing a smile. "Yes, just surprised." Joanne didn't push, but her gaze lingered, understanding that this was more than just about the chair. The note, the downsizing, it was all too much. Henry, still smiling, turned toward Susan. "See, I told you she'd love it." But Martha wasn't listening anymore. She had heard enough. The weight of the chair, the weight of their expectations was heavy on her chest. "They didn't think about me at all," she realized. "They didn't think about what I wanted, only what they thought was best for me." Her hands clenched around the fabric of her dress and she stood up, forcing herself to speak, though her voice trembled slightly. "I don't need it," she said, her words cutting through the air, more firm than she intended. "I don't need a chair to feel comfortable, and I don't need you deciding what's best for me." The room fell silent, Henry's smile faltering. Susan's face hardened and she opened her mouth to say something, but Martha didn't wait for her. She turned away, walking slowly toward the other room, her heart racing. Joanne followed her with her eyes but said nothing. She knew this wasn't about the chair, it was about something deeper, and Martha was only just beginning to understand what needed to be done. The days following Christmas felt heavy, the once festive atmosphere in the house now replaced by a low, unspoken tension. Martha could barely look at the rocking chair without feeling a sense of resentment. It was as if Henry and Susan believed they could push her into a smaller, quieter life with one simple gesture. Each day since the Christmas exchange brought more subtle, passive-aggressive remarks from Susan. At first, it was small comments about how much easier life would be with fewer things to manage. "Martha," Susan said one afternoon as they were putting away the leftover Christmas food, "don't you think it's time to start considering what's best for all of us? A smaller space would be so much easier for you." Martha's grip on the dish she was drying tightened, but she didn't say anything. It wasn't the first time Susan had made a remark like that, but this time it stung more than usual. It wasn't about the size of the space, it was about being treated like she had no say in her own life. She didn't want to be downsized like a forgotten piece of furniture. The conversations with Henry weren't much better. Martha overheard them discussing, yet again, plans for her to move. "We could probably find something for her near us," Susan said, her voice dripping with practicality. "Smaller, easier to manage." Henry, still unsure about the whole idea, mumbled, "But she's been in that house for years. It's not going to be easy to convince her." "Of course it will be," Susan interrupted. "It's for her own good. She'll be more comfortable in a smaller home, less clutter, less upkeep. We'll make it easy for her. It's time." Martha's breath caught in her chest. They were already deciding her future for her. She could feel her blood pressure rise as she stood frozen in the hallway, hearing them talk about her like a problem to be managed. Their plan for her life, their decisions. Later that night, as the family sat down to dinner, Susan's remarks continued. "We're really going to make things easier for you, Martha. Think about it. No stairs, fewer rooms. Just think how relaxing it'll be." Henry nodded along, his face clouded with uncertainty, but Martha could see the hesitation in his eyes. He wasn't fully on board with this plan, but he wasn't speaking up either. She wasn't a priority in his life anymore, she was simply something to be handled. Martha set her fork down slowly, her pulse rising as she chose her words carefully. "I'm happy where I am, Henry," she said softly, not looking up. "I don't need anyone to decide that for me." Susan's smile faded just slightly. "It's not about what you need, Martha, it's about what's best for you." Her voice was sweet but edged with something more, a touch of impatience that made Martha feel small. The rest of the evening passed in strained silence, Martha retreating into herself, the walls of her independence closing in tighter. "They don't get it," she thought. "They think they know what's best for me." That night after dinner, she called Joanne, needing her friend's steady voice. When Joanne answered, Martha barely kept the tremble from her voice. "They're still at it. Every day more comments about downsizing. I overheard them talking about moving me into a smaller place. It's like they've already decided for me." Joanne's voice was calm but full of conviction. "You know what you need to do, right? You need to stand your ground, Martha. Don't let them bulldoze you." Martha took a deep breath, absorbing her friend's words. Joanne had always been her rock. "I know, but it's not easy. They just don't seem to understand." "They don't need to," Joanne interrupted, a quiet strength in her tone. "What matters is you understand. You're not a problem to be managed. You're your own person." Martha thought about that as she hung up. She had been silent for too long. Now it was time to make her move. Not with confrontation, not with anger, but with the quiet strength she had always carried with her. She wasn't going to let Henry and Susan take her life from her, not this time. As the days passed, Martha began gathering her thoughts, reviewing her plans for her estate and her home. She wasn't sure exactly what her next step would be, but she knew one thing for sure: she was done being a passive participant in her own life. The house felt strangely quiet, the silence thick with Martha's thoughts. Christmas was now a distant memory, replaced by the pressing reality of her family's plans for her future. The rocking chair from Henry and Susan's thoughtful gift still sat unused in the corner, a painful reminder of their assumption that they knew what was best for her. Each time Martha looked at it, the weight of their disregard for her wishes grew heavier. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was no longer her own. Their plans for her were taking shape without her input, plans that didn't include her voice. They'd spoken of downsizing her life as though she were an object to be reorganized, not a person with her own desires. Martha sat at her kitchen table one morning, the legal papers before her, reviewing her estate plan once again. Her fingers traced the edges of the documents, papers she hadn't touched in years. Her house, the place she'd lived in for decades, needed to be protected. But how? She wasn't ready to confront Henry and Susan head-on, not yet. She would prepare herself first. Martha knew she had options. Her lawyer, Carl Roberts, had helped her with her estate years ago. She needed his advice again. With a steady hand, she picked up the phone and dialed his number. "Martha, it's good to hear from you, Carl ends. Word, his voice warm but professional. "How can I help?" "I need to review my estate plan again, Carl," Martha said, her voice calm but firm. "I need to make sure my house is legally protected. I don't want anyone, especially Henry or Susan, getting control of my assets." Carl paused for a moment before responding. "Understood. We can go over your will and set up some legal safeguards. We'll make sure no one can force you out of your home or take control of your affairs." Martha felt a rush of relief. For the first time in days, the tight knot in her chest loosened. Carl had always been dependable, and now more than ever, she needed his help to secure her independence. "I'll prepare the paperwork and send it over to you," Carl continued. "We'll make sure everything's airtight." Martha ended the call feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She was taking control, no more passive compliance. It was time to act. Susan's passive-aggressive comments hadn't stopped. Every time Martha saw her, there was a new suggestion about downsizing. "You'll be so much more comfortable in a smaller space," Susan would say, her voice syrupy sweet but carrying an undercurrent of expectation. "Think of all the things you won't have to worry about anymore." Martha bit back, the frustration rising in her throat. It wasn't about comfort, it was about control. Susan didn't see that. Henry, too, had become a passive participant in this plan. He didn't challenge Susan's ideas, and his silence spoke volumes. He wasn't fully on board with it, but neither was he stopping it. At night, as Martha lay in bed, she thought about the house. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was the life she had built, the memories that filled its rooms. And it wasn't theirs to take. No one could make her give it up. The next day, Martha began gathering the documents she'd need. She didn't share her plans with anyone, not Henry, not Susan. The decision was hers to make, and when the time came, she'd make sure they understood just how wrong they were. Joanne, her closest friend, had been her sounding board, offering quiet reassurance. "Stand your ground," Joanne had said. "This is your life. No one gets to decide it for you." With those words in mind, Martha prepared herself. She wasn't going to let her family push her around. Not this time. She would ensure her future was hers to control, and she wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. The house felt still, the silence hanging in the air as Martha stood in front of the rocking chair. It had been several days since Christmas, and the chair still sat in the corner, its presence a silent reminder of everything Henry and Susan were trying to impose on her. Martha's fingers lightly brushed the smooth wood, but she didn't feel comfort or appreciation, only resentment. The chair was meant to be a gesture, a kind one, they'd claimed, but Martha saw it differently. It wasn't a gift. It was a symbol of their plans for her life, plans she hadn't been asked about. Her gaze shifted to the note she'd discarded earlier. The words still burned in her mind. "We're downsizing you." Martha stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of those words. She had spent a lifetime building her independence, and now they were trying to take it from her, piece by piece. No more, not anymore. A soft knock on the door broke her from her thoughts. Henry and Susan entered, their faces bright with the same excitement they'd had on Christmas morning. "Did you try out the chair, Mom?" Henry asked, eager. "We thought you'd love it." Martha glanced over at the chair, then back at them. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I don't need it." Henry's face fell, but he tried to recover quickly. "It's a nice chair, Mom. You'll love it. It's perfect for your new place." Susan nodded, her tone insistent. "It'll be easier for you, Martha, a smaller space, less to take care of." Martha's grip tightened on the edge of the table, her voice steady as she spoke. "I don't need a rocking chair, and I don't need a smaller place. I'm happy where I am." There was a moment of stunned silence. Henry opened his mouth to speak, but Martha cut him off, her resolve clear. "I've spent years making my own decisions," she said, her voice unwavering. "I won't be pushed into something I don't want. I'll stay where I am, thanks." Susan's patience snapped. "Martha, this is for your own good," she said, her voice rising. "Why can't you see that? A smaller home, less clutter, it's what's best for you." Martha felt a surge of frustration but forced herself to stay calm. "What's best for me is having a say in my own life. You don't get to decide that for me." Henry, still struggling to understand, fumbled for words. "But Mom, we just want you to be comfortable. Think of all the upkeep you won't have to worry about. We're just trying to make things easier for you." "By taking away my choices," Martha replied, her gaze steady. "No, Henry, you're trying to take away my life." Susan's face flushed with anger. "You're being difficult, Martha. We're just trying to help." Martha stood tall, her eyes meeting Susan's. I don't need your help in that way, Susan. I need my independence. The room fell silent. Henry looked uncomfortable, glancing between Susan and Martha. He didn't want to argue, but he wasn't ready to confront Susan either. Martha could see the internal struggle in his eyes, but she knew this wasn't his fight, it was hers. Without another word, Martha turned and left the room, walking slowly toward the kitchen. She had said what needed to be said. There would be no more pretending. She wasn't just a problem to be managed. She wasn't a piece of furniture to be downsized. She was Martha Wilkes, and she had the right to decide how her life would go. The chair sat in the corner, still and untouched, but Martha was no longer the woman who would quietly accept what others decided for her. Not anymore. The room felt colder than it should have, even with the heat on. Martha stood in front of the unused rocking chair, its smooth wood gleaming in the corner, a stark reminder of everything Henry and Susan had tried to impose on her. She had spent the past few days trying to push away the anger, but it was still there, simmering beneath the surface. They thought they could control her life with a chair, a note, and a few well-meaning words. She had kept quiet about it at first, but now, standing in her living room, it was clear they were wrong. This wasn't just about the chair, it was about her life, her independence. And she wasn't going to let them take that from her. Martha's hands shook slightly as she reached down and began unwrapping the gift. The festive paper crinkled in her fingers, each rip a little victory. She had waited too long for this moment. The note that had come with the chair still burned in her mind. "We're downsizing you." The words seemed to echo around the room, a constant reminder of how little they valued her opinion. Once the wrapping was off, Martha picked up the note that had come with the chair. She unfolded it and placed her own message next to it, scribbling down, "I don't need to be downsized. You've underestimated me." With a steady hand, she rewrapped the chair. Each fold of paper, each piece of tape felt like she was putting her foot down in ways she hadn't done before. There was no more pretending, no more allowing them to dictate her life. Martha stood for a moment, looking at the chair. She could hear Henry's voice in her head all the times he had tried to convince her. "You'll love it, it's for your own good." But it wasn't love, it wasn't care, it was control. She grabbed the wrapped chair and walked out to the porch. The cool air hit her face and she placed it on Henry and Susan's doorstep, the same place it had been left for her, without a word. Then she turned on her heel and walked back inside. Her heart raced, but it wasn't fear, it was something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Just as she entered the door, her phone buzzed. Henry's name flashed on the screen. Martha's breath caught for a moment, but she answered it without hesitation. "Why'd you return it, Mom?" Henry asked, his voice confused but tinged with something else, concern or maybe frustration, she couldn't tell. Martha paused for only a second before replying, her voice calm but firm. "I don't need a chair to be comfortable, I need my independence." There was a long silence on the other end. She could almost hear Henry's mind working. He didn't have an immediate response, and then Susan's voice cut in. "You're being selfish, Martha," Susan said, her tone laced with anger. "You don't understand what we're trying to do for you. You're making this harder than it needs to be." Martha felt her jaw tighten, but she stayed composed. "Family is about respect, not control," she said quietly. "You've underestimated me, Susan. You've made your decisions without asking what I want. That's not family, that's control." On the other end, there was another silence, more telling than words. Henry didn't respond. He didn't have to. Susan's angry breath was all the confirmation Martha needed. She hung up the phone and took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body slowly start to dissipate. This was just the beginning. They thought she would cave, that they could force her into submission. But she wasn't the woman they thought she was, not anymore. Martha walked into her living room feeling lighter than she had in days. The chair was gone, but her independence, that was something they couldn't take, not without a fight. The house felt unnervingly quiet as Martha sat at her kitchen table, the papers she had spent the past hour reviewing spread before her. Christmas had come and gone, but the weight of the chair and the message it carried was still heavy in her heart. "We're downsizing you," the words echoed in her mind every time she passed the chair, untouched and gathering dust in the corner of the room. They thought they could decide her future, limit her choices, control her life with a chair and a few kind words, but they had underestimated her. This wasn't about the chair, it was about her independence. And it wasn't just about a move, it was about reclaiming her right to live life on her own terms. She'd already decided it was time to take action. Martha picked up the phone and dialed Carl Roberts, the lawyer who had helped her with her estate years ago. She had trusted him then, and she needed him now. "Martha, it's good to hear from you," Carl said warmly on the other end of the line. "How can I help today?" "I need to go over my estate plan again, Carl," Martha said, her voice firm and steady. "I need to make sure my house is protected. I don't want anyone, especially Henry and Susan, taking control of my finances or my property." There was a pause on the line. "I understand," Carl replied, his voice even more serious. "We'll make sure everything's in place. It's important that no one can force you out or take control of your affairs. We'll make sure it's locked down tight." Martha's breath released in a quiet sigh of relief. It was the first time in days she felt as if she had a clear path ahead of her. Carl was dependable. He would ensure her rights were safeguarded. "We'll go over everything," Carl continued. "I'll send over the paperwork and we'll ensure it's legally binding." Martha's heart lightened just a little, knowing that her independence wasn't just a matter of willpower anymore. She could back it up with legal protection. No more wondering if Henry and Susan's persistent plans would take root. No more doubting her right to make decisions about her own life. After ending the call, Martha felt something inside her stir. She wasn't ready to confront her children directly yet, not with anger, not just yet. But now she had the tools to protect herself from their attempts to control her. Still, Susan wasn't giving up. Martha could hear her voice in the hallway, pressuring Henry. "She won't have to worry about upkeep. A smaller place is perfect for her. It'll be easier to manage." Martha knew she couldn't stay silent, but she had learned not to react immediately to Susan's veiled criticisms. Instead, she observed, calm, collected, and waited for the right moment. She wouldn't be pushed. Not anymore. That evening, Martha decided it was time to take the next step. As she prepared to gather more documents, she found herself reflecting on the years she had spent building this life, the house, her independence, and all the decisions she'd made for herself. She had done this on her own, and she would continue to do so. Joanne's words echoed in her mind, offering support when Martha needed it most. "Stand your ground." Martha knew that was what she had to do. The house, the estate, everything she had worked for was hers, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. Not Henry, not Susan, not anyone. With newfound resolve, Martha gathered her papers. This wasn't just about securing her home, it was about securing her future, and she was ready to fight for it. The atmosphere in the house had changed. The air was thicker now, charged with unspoken tension. Martha could feel the shift every time she passed Henry or Susan. Their once light-hearted conversations had become strained, full of hesitant glances and uneasy silences. The legal action she had taken to protect her home and independence was already starting to ripple through the family. She could see it in the way they looked at her now, half concerned, half defensive. It was late one afternoon when Henry finally approached her, his footsteps hesitant as he stood in the doorway of the living room. His eyes were downcast, avoiding her gaze. "Martha," he began slowly, "we need to talk." Martha put down the book she'd been reading, her eyes not betraying any emotion. She had expected this moment, the inevitable apology that was more about fear than remorse. But she wasn't about to make it easy for him. She wasn't the one who had to apologize. "I've been thinking about everything," Henry continued, his voice quieter than usual. "And, I realize now maybe I didn't fully get it. I was just trying to help, but I see that I crossed a line." Martha's fingers tightened around the arm of her chair, but she didn't interrupt. She had been waiting for this, waiting for him to understand that it wasn't about a chair or a house or being downsized. It was about autonomy. It was about respect. "I didn't mean to make you feel like your opinion didn't matter, Mom," Henry said, looking up finally, his eyes full of uncertainty. "I'm sorry, I should have listened more." Martha nodded slowly, absorbing his words without showing any sign of forgiveness. She had heard enough of this before, empty apologies disguised as an attempt to avoid the real issue. They didn't get it. He didn't get it. Susan was a different story. She had been much quieter since Martha had sent the rocking chair back, but that didn't mean she wasn't simmering underneath. A few days after Henry's conversation, Susan came to her with the same polished smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You know, Martha," Susan began, her tone overly sweet, "we're just concerned about you. We want what's best. It's not about control, it's about making your life easier. We just want you to be comfortable." Martha couldn't help the bitter laugh that slipped out. "Comfortable?" she repeated, her voice low but firm. "You don't get to decide what makes me comfortable. You don't get to decide anything about my life anymore." Susan's smile faltered, and for the first time Martha saw a flash of uncertainty behind her daughter-in-law's eyes. But instead of backing down, Susan pressed harder, her voice rising with frustration. "You're being difficult, Martha. We're just trying to help. Why can't you see that?" Martha felt the weight of the past few weeks lift off her shoulders. For the first time, she was no longer backing down. "What's best for me is my independence, Susan," she said evenly, "and no one, not even you, gets to take that away." Susan opened her mouth to argue, but Martha turned away before she could say anything more. It was done. There would be no more negotiating. There would be no more convincing. Susan could say all she wanted, but Martha had made her decision. The legal papers were in place and her future was secured. Later, Martha sat at her kitchen table sorting through some documents when the phone rang. It was Henry again, his voice a little more guarded than usual. "Mom, I get it," he said, his words slow but sincere. "I've been talking to some of the family and they've started asking questions. They're wondering what's going on with you and Susan. We all see it and I think we all know this isn't just about the house." Martha felt a small twinge of satisfaction. The situation was no longer just hers to defend. The family was starting to see it too. Henry wasn't in control anymore, and neither was Susan. Martha took a deep breath and let the silence between them settle. "I'm done defending myself, Henry," she said simply. "I've made my choice, and I won't back down from it." As she hung up the phone, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The house was still hers, her life, her choices, they were hers to make, and nothing would take that away. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, the air thick with anticipation. Martha sat at the head of the table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Henry and Susan sat across from her, their posture rigid, their faces masks of tension. Carl, the lawyer she had called in to help safeguard her independence, sat beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance. The rocking chair that had once symbolized their attempt to control her life now felt distant, its rejection final. But this meeting was where the real battle would begin. Henry spoke first, his voice uncertain as if testing the waters. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. This whole thing with the house, with the legal stuff, it's not necessary." Martha's gaze remained fixed on him, unwavering. "It's necessary, Henry. You can't decide what's best for me anymore. I've spent my whole life making decisions for myself. I'm not a child, and I'm certainly not a burden to you." Susan's face flushed with frustration. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Martha, we're only trying to help you. You don't need this big house anymore. We're trying to make your life easier, not harder." Carl, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat, his voice cutting through Susan's pleading. "Respectfully, Susan, that's not your decision to make. Martha has every right to live in her home, make her own choices, and protect her assets. The legal documentation is in place, and unless Martha wishes otherwise, you don't have the authority to change any of that." Susan bristled, her gaze snapping toward Carl. "But she doesn't understand. She's being difficult. We're her family, Carl. We're just trying to look out for her. Why can't she see that?" Martha's voice remained steady, unshaken by Susan's rising anger. "What's difficult, Susan, is being treated like I don't matter. What's difficult is having my life decided for me when no one even bothered to ask me what I want. I don't need your help, I need respect." Henry shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers drumming on the edge of the table. "We've always done things together, Mom. I don't understand why this is so different." "It's different because you didn't listen," Martha said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been telling you and Susan for a long time now, I don't need you to fix me, I need you to trust that I know what's best for my life." Carl looked between them all, his expression neutral but resolute. "This isn't about opinions or feelings anymore. The legal paperwork is in place. Martha's assets and her home are protected. If you continue to press her to give up control, there will be legal consequences. I'm here to make sure those consequences are understood." The room grew quiet, the weight of Carl's words hanging in the air. Martha could feel the tension shift. For the first time in a long while, the power dynamic had changed. She wasn't a passive participant in this conversation, she was the one in control. Susan's face twisted in frustration, but she remained silent, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. Henry, on the other hand, looked defeated. He seemed to understand now the full weight of what his mother was saying. The words had finally sunk in. "I'm sorry, Mom," Henry said quietly, his voice lacking its usual certainty. "I didn't mean to, I didn't realize what I was doing, but it's not too late, right? We can still work together, can't we?" Martha met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "We can work together, Henry, but on my terms, not on Susan's, not on yours, my life, my decisions." Henry nodded, his gaze dropping to his lap. He didn't speak again, and Susan's silence spoke volumes. She was still seething, but she knew deep down that this battle wasn't one she could win. Martha stood up, her movements slow but purposeful. "I've made my choice," she said, looking at both of them with a quiet strength, "and I won't back down from it." As she turned toward the door, Carl stood up as well, nodding toward Henry and Susan. "If you continue to pursue this, I'll have to take further legal action," Carl said, his voice cool and professional. "But I suggest you consider respecting Martha's wishes. This isn't something that will end well if pushed further." With that, Martha left the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't feel anger, she didn't feel fear, she felt a deep, satisfying sense of relief. The fight for her independence wasn't over, but she was finally standing tall in it. The next chapter had begun, and she was the one writing it. The atmosphere in the house had shifted. And Martha could feel it in every passing glance, every hesitant word. The once warm interactions with Henry and Susan were now marked by tension, awkward silences hanging in the air like a storm about to break. They hadn't yet fully accepted her independence, and she could feel the weight of their discomfort pressing down on her. It was late one afternoon when Henry finally came to her, his footsteps cautious as he lingered at the doorway. He had always been the more sensitive of the two, but even now his face was filled with uncertainty. He wasn't sure what to say, but the guilt had clearly begun to take its toll. "Martha," he began slowly, "we need to talk." Martha put down the book she was reading, meeting his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. She wasn't about to make this easier for him. She'd heard enough empty apologies in the past. This time, it was different. "I've been thinking about everything," Henry continued, his voice quieter than usual. "And I realized, maybe I didn't fully understand. I was trying to help, but I see now that I crossed a line." Martha's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair, but she said nothing, letting him continue. She wasn't going to rush to forgive him. His apology, while genuine, didn't change the fact that he hadn't listened to her before. "I'm sorry," Henry said, his eyes downcast. "I didn't mean to make you feel like your opinion didn't matter. I should have been more respectful." Martha nodded slowly. "You're starting to understand, Henry, but it's not just about this apology, it's about respect. You can't fix everything with an "I'm sorry." Henry opened his mouth to speak, but Martha stopped him with a look. She wasn't here to placate him, not this time. Susan, however, was a different story. Martha hadn't expected a change from her. The tension in the house seemed to radiate from Susan, who had grown more distant but no less determined. She came to Martha one evening, her polished smile only skin deep, as if she was trying to force a connection that wasn't there. "Martha," Susan began, her voice overly sweet, "I just want you to understand that we're only trying to help. We want what's best for you. You don't need all this space. A smaller place would be so much more comfortable for you. You'll see that eventually." Martha felt a surge of frustration but forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't about to let Susan dismiss her feelings any longer. "Comfortable?" Martha repeated, her voice low but firm. "What you call comfortable is just another way of telling me what I need. You don't get to make that decision for me, Susan. I'm not your child." Susan's smile faltered, and for the first time Martha saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. But instead of backing down, Susan pressed harder, her voice rising with frustration. "You're being difficult, Martha. Why can't you see we're just looking out for you?" Martha remained steady, her gaze unwavering. "I'm difficult because I refuse to be controlled. I'm not a child, Susan, and I don't need you or Henry deciding what's best for me." Susan's lips pressed into a thin line, her anger simmering beneath the surface, but she didn't say anything more. It was as if the fight had left her, and without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Martha's chest felt lighter as the door closed behind Susan. The words had been said, the boundaries had been drawn. For the first time in years, Martha felt in control of her own life again. She wasn't going to let Susan or anyone else dictate how she lived. The phone rang a few minutes later. It was Henry. His voice was quiet but determined. "Mom," he said, "I've been talking to some of the family. They're starting to ask questions. They see the tension and they're starting to wonder what's really going on." Martha could hear the hesitance in his voice. She wasn't sure if he was trying to be understanding or just searching for a way out of the conflict. "I'm done defending myself, Henry," she said simply. "I've made my choice. I won't back down from it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, then a soft sigh. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone in this." Martha felt a small measure of relief. Even though this battle wasn't over, she could feel the shift. Slowly, her family was starting to see the truth, even if they weren't ready to fully accept it yet. She wasn't just a mother to be fixed or a problem to be managed. She was Martha Wilkes, and her life was hers to control. The days that followed were quiet, filled with little more than the hum of daily life. The phone calls from Henry and Susan became less frequent, their voices edged with hesitation. Martha continued her routine, but now there was a new strength in the way she carried herself. She had reclaimed her independence, and nothing was going to take that from her. As she moved forward, the rest of the family watched in silence, some of them beginning to ask themselves if they had been wrong. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about recognizing Martha for who she truly was, a woman capable of making her own choices, living her life on her own terms. Martha felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. This was only the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days had passed in a quiet but oppressive rhythm. Martha had reclaimed her space, her life, and her voice. But the storm was far from over. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about the principle, the dignity she had fought for. And Susan, unable to accept defeat, was about to make one last attempt to regain control. It was a chilly afternoon when Susan arrived at Martha's doorstep, her heels clicking against the porch with a sense of purpose. The air between them had been thick with tension for weeks, and Martha had prepared herself for this moment, knowing it was inevitable. Susan didn't waste time with pleasantries. As soon as the door opened, she stepped inside, her demeanor cold and rigid. "Martha," she began, her tone sharp, "this has gone on long enough." Martha remained calm, her posture relaxed but firm. "I'm listening." Susan's eyes narrowed, her frustration evident. "You're making a spectacle of this. You're turning a simple request into a battle. All we ever wanted was to help, but now you've alienated yourself from the family. Everyone is talking about it, and frankly, it's embarrassing." Martha took a steady breath, feeling a rush of quiet strength flow through her. She wasn't about to let Susan manipulate her into feeling guilty. "The only spectacle here, Susan," she said quietly, "is your disregard for my independence. You've overstepped, and now you're trying to paint me as the villain, but I'm not the one forcing control on anyone." Susan's face flushed with anger, and for a moment Martha thought she might lash out. But instead, Susan crossed her arms and took a deep breath. "This is about family, Martha," she said, the words dripping with frustration. "We're supposed to help each other, not tear each other apart. You've made your point, but it's tearing us all apart." Martha held her ground, her voice steady. "I've made my choice, Susan. I'm not asking for your help, I'm asking for respect." There was a long silence between them, Susan's anger still simmering beneath the surface but no longer directed outward. Martha had drawn the line, and Susan knew it. Just as Susan opened her mouth to say something more, Henry appeared in the hallway, his expression strained. He had been listening from the other room, and Martha could see the shift in his demeanor. The guilt had begun to weigh on him, but his loyalty to Susan still held him back. "Mom, we need to talk," Henry said, his voice softer than before. But his eyes told a different story. He was starting to see Susan for who she truly was. Martha didn't flinch. "I've already said everything I need to say, Henry. There's nothing more to talk about." Susan shot him a look, her expression a mix of frustration and defeat. We just want what's best for her, Henry. Why can't she see that? Henry's gaze wavered between his mother and wife, a growing realization settling in his mind. The tension in the room was palpable as he took a hesitant step toward Martha, his voice quiet but sincere. Maybe I've been wrong, Mom. I never thought about it like you've explained, but I don't know what to do now. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. Martha's eyes softened, but she didn't let her guard down. I've made my choice, Henry. It's not your fault. You're just doing what Susan's told you to, but you need to start thinking for yourself. Your loyalty shouldn't mean sacrificing my independence. For the first time, Henry didn't argue. He just stood there, silently acknowledging the truth that had been in front of him all along. Susan, however, was not finished. Her attempt to control the narrative was slipping away. The reality of the situation was setting in. She could no longer manipulate Martha. She wasn't going to win this fight, not by force, not by guilt. The family wasn't going to be swayed by her tactics anymore. Martha, sensing the finality of the moment, took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I'm leaving for a while, she said, her voice calm but resolute. I need space to clear my head, to find peace again. Henry looked at her, his face filled with regret. Are you sure, Mom, we can work through this? No, Martha replied firmly. This is something I need to do for myself. I've already given up enough for other people's comfort. Now it's time to live my life on my terms. With that, she turned and walked to the door, the decision made. As she stepped outside, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The tension, the guilt, the manipulation, it was all behind her now. As she walked down the porch steps, the wind picking up around her, she knew that this was just the beginning. E was in control, and nothing would stop her from living the life she deserved. Susan stood in the doorway, fuming with frustration, her plans crumbling in front of her. Henry, caught between the two women, could only watch as his mother walked away, taking the first step toward reclaiming her freedom. Martha's heart was steady as she walked toward her future, one she would now shape entirely on her own terms. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the table where Martha sat, sipping her coffee. The house felt alive again. The silence, once oppressive and heavy with the weight of old decisions, had shifted into something more peaceful, more hers. The walls, filled with memories, no longer felt like reminders of the life others wanted her to live. Instead, they were hers to cherish, to grow within. It was no longer just a house, it was her sanctuary. For the first time in a long while, Martha felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She'd signed up for a painting class at the community center a few weeks ago, and now it was becoming her escape, her expression of freedom. The colors on her canvas were no longer just strokes of paint, they were the emotions she had held back for years. They represented the release of every expectation, every attempt to control her that she had carried for too long. Each brushstroke brought a new layer of clarity. The uncertainty of the past few months, the confrontation with Susan, the legal battles, seemed to fade with every completed canvas. Painting had become more than just a hobby. It was her way of reclaiming her voice, of letting the world see her in a way she never had before. Every piece of art was a declaration. This was her life, and she was taking it back. One evening, while Martha was cleaning her brushes, her phone buzzed. It was Henry. She hadn't heard much from him since the last conversation. She had expected this. Even now, as much as she had fought for her independence, the family's expectations still lingered in the air, hanging over her like an unspoken contract. Mom, Henry's voice was softer than usual. I've been thinking I owe you an apology. Martha paused, taking a slow breath. She hadn't been waiting for this moment, not anymore. She had learned that her worth wasn't contingent on their approval. I'm listening, Henry, she said, her voice steady. I didn't see it before, but I get it now. I've been wrong. I should have trusted you, and I should have respected your choices. Martha leaned against the counter, her hands resting on the edge as she absorbed his words. This wasn't the first apology she had received, but this time something felt different. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't trying to fix anything. Instead, he was recognizing her as an equal, someone whose voice mattered. I've been trying to fix things that weren't broken, Henry continued. I thought I knew what was best for you, but I see now that it was never about me knowing better, it was about respecting your life. I'm sorry, Mom. The words settled in her chest, and for the first time she felt the space between them begin to shrink. She wasn't sure if they were fully healed, but the shift was undeniable. It's not about you being sorry, she replied softly. It's about you seeing me, Henry, for who I am, not for who you think I should be. There was a pause, a small silence filled with understanding. "I do see you, Mom," he finally said. She hung up the phone, the conversation leaving her with a sense of relief. The weight of years of unspoken tension had lightened, and for the first time Martha felt that her family was beginning to understand her not as a mother or a problem to fix, but as an individual with her own wants and needs. Later that week, Joanne came over to check in on her. The two of them sat in the living room, sipping wine and laughing over old stories. Joanne had been Martha's rock, the steady presence in her life, always encouraging her to embrace her independence. This time, Joanne had a new idea. "I think it's time for that trip you've always talked about," Joanne said, her eyes sparkling. "You've spent so much time taking care of everyone else. Now it's your turn to live for yourself. I've been looking at some travel deals. Europe, the places you've always wanted to see." Martha felt a surge of excitement. She had always dreamed of visiting Europe, but it had always seemed like something for later, something that was always postponed for the sake of others. But now it was different. Now it was for her. "Let's do it," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's time." In the weeks that followed, Martha made plans for her solo trip. She booked her flight, packed her bags, and felt a sense of anticipation that she hadn't felt in years. The family, though still hesitant at times, had begun to accept her choices. Susan, in particular, was quiet, her attempts to control Martha's life fading into the background. Martha was no longer afraid to be herself. She was no longer living for anyone else's expectations. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was her rebirth. It was her statement that she was worthy of living a life that she chose. As she boarded the plane, a quiet smile spread across her face. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new story altogether. The future was waiting for her, and for the first time, Martha was walking into it not as someone who had been silenced, but as someone who had found her voice. The plane ascended, and as she gazed out the window, Martha knew that the life she had been searching for was finally within reach. Martha stood on the balcony of her small Parisian apartment, the cool morning air wrapping around her like a promise. Below, the city hummed with life, people going about their day, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place just above them. For the first time in years, Martha felt truly at peace. The house in Illinois was still hers, her independence fully reclaimed, but this was hers too. She had made the choice to step into a life she had long ignored, and now, standing in the heart of Europe, it felt as if the world was finally open to her. She had never thought much about traveling, at least not for herself. Her life had been filled with the duties of others, the expectations of family, and the role she had always played. But in Paris, surrounded by art and culture, something inside her had shifted. She had signed up for a painting class, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. Each stroke of paint on the canvas felt like a release, an affirmation of her independence. She was learning how to express herself again, finding new parts of her soul she had buried long ago. Later that day, after a stroll through an art gallery, Martha found a quiet cafe overlooking the Seine. She ordered a cappuccino, the warmth of the cup in her hands a comfort as she looked out over the river. She watched the boats glide by, the golden light of the afternoon creating a dance of shadows on the water. Everything here was different, yet it felt so right. This wasn't just a vacation, this was a rebirth. She had stepped into her life with both feet, and the world was responding in kind. Her phone buzzed in her bag, breaking her moment of peace. It was Henry. She hadn't heard from him much since their last conversation. A part of her had expected the phone call, it had been coming for a while now. Taking a deep breath, Martha answered. "Mom," Henry's voice was quieter than usual. "I've been thinking, I owe you an apology." Martha leaned back in her chair, letting his words sink in. She had no expectations, no hopes that the apology would somehow undo the past, but she was willing to listen. She had earned that much for herself. "I didn't get it, Mom," Henry continued. "I was trying to help, but I see now that I didn't respect your choices. I'm sorry." Martha's fingers tapped gently on the table. "It's not about being sorry, Henry," she said softly. "It's about seeing me for who I am, not who you want me to be." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Henry's voice came through, more understanding than before. "I understand now, I do, and I'm sorry I didn't before." Martha felt a shift inside, but it wasn't the heavy weight of years spent trying to earn approval. It was relief, yes, but also something new, and understanding that forgiveness, if it ever came, was something she no longer needed to carry. As the call ended, Martha felt something click into place. She was no longer waiting for approval. She didn't need Henry's apology to feel validated. Her choices were hers and her life was hers to live. No one else had a say in that anymore. A few days later, Joanne called, her voice bright with excitement. "Martha, I've found the perfect travel deal. You've always dreamed of going to Europe. Let's make it happen." Martha smiled, a warm glow filling her chest. "Let's do it. It's time for me to live for myself." By the time she boarded the plane back to the U.S., Martha felt stronger, more connected to herself than ever before. The house, the legal battles, the family struggles, they were all still there, but they no longer held power over her. She had walked away with something far more important: her life, her decisions, her independence. And as the plane lifted into the sky, Martha gazed out the window, knowing this was just the beginning of a life fully lived. Martha stood at the kitchen counter, a soft hum of contentment filling the air as she stirred her coffee. Her life had transformed in ways she hadn't even imagined a few months ago. The house, once filled with tension, was now her sanctuary. Each morning she woke to the quiet rhythm of her own choices. No longer driven by the expectations of her family, she was finally living on her own terms. The phone rang, pulling Martha from her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID. It was he. NRY? She hadn't heard from him much since their last conversation, and a part of her had almost expected that he would call again. His apology, though late, had started the process of healing, but there was still a distance between them. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Mom," Henry's voice was softer than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I owe you another apology." Martha's grip on the phone tightened slightly. She wasn't sure what to expect this time, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. "I didn't fully understand," Henry continued, his words careful. "I thought I knew what was best for you, but I see now. I see that I didn't respect your choices. I've been wrong, Mom." Martha's heart didn't race with joy, nor did it feel the surge of relief it might have once brought. Instead, she took a steady breath, knowing that no amount of apologies could undo the years of being pushed aside, of being treated as though her voice didn't matter. "It's not about an apology, Henry," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "It's about seeing me for who I am, not who you want me to be." There was a long pause, the silence thick with meaning. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice softer, more understanding. "I do see you, Mom. I'm sorry for all of it. I see you now." Martha didn't rush to forgive him. The apology was important, but it didn't change the work she had already done to reclaim herself. She had done the hard work of finding peace on her own without needing validation from anyone else. "Thank you, Henry," she said, her voice steady. "But I've made my choice. I don't need your apology to move forward. My life is mine to live." She hung up the phone with a quiet sense of finality. Her family was finally seeing her as the woman she had always been, but she had long since stopped needing their approval. A few days later, Susan reached out, her tone still tinged with frustration. "Martha, I've been thinking too," she said, her voice barely controlled. "I'm sorry, we've been trying to help. I know I've pushed too hard." Martha listened but didn't respond immediately. She had heard these words before, but this time she didn't feel the rush to forgive. "I'm not angry, Susan," Martha replied, her voice calm. "I'm just not going to be controlled anymore. I've made my choice." Susan didn't say much after that, and Martha felt a sense of relief as the conversation ended. The battle for control had shifted. Martha had won that fight, not with anger or regret, but with strength and resolve. In the days that followed, Martha continued to live her life without the burden of guilt or the weight of others' expectations. She spent her mornings painting, her evenings reading, and her days planning for a future she had finally claimed for herself. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. The phone calls from Henry and Susan became infrequent, but they no longer held the power to unsettle her. She was living for herself, not for anyone else. She had reclaimed her home, her independence, and most importantly, her sense of self. Martha's life was finally her own, and it felt like freedom. The house, the legal battles, and the family struggles, they all faded into the background as Martha stepped forward into a future where her decisions were hers to make. And as she sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Martha knew she had become the woman she was always meant to be. The final test had been passed, and she had won. Martha sat by the window, the warm light of late afternoon spilling into the room. The house, once heavy with tension, now felt like her sanctuary. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was a comfort. Everything had changed. Every morning she woke to her own decisions, not to the expectations of others. She had created something new for herself. The community group she had started for older adults was thriving. The people who once thought they had no place, no voice, were now sharing their stories, their art, their lives. Martha helped them embrace their independence just as she had. In a few short months, they had become a tight-knit circle, offering support and understanding. Joanne had been there from the start, offering unwavering encouragement. "You're doing more than you realize," she'd said during their weekly meetups. "These people look up to you, Martha." Martha's heart swelled. She'd never considered herself a leader, but now, in the faces of the group, she saw herself reflected. They weren't just learning to live independently, they were doing it with her help. But it wasn't just about the group. Martha had a dream, a shop she'd longed to open, a space for creativity and connection. It had always seemed like something for later, something to put off, but now it felt right. The idea of a small, cozy store filled with art supplies, handmade crafts, and a place for people to create was growing into something real. He was determined to make it happen. The phone rang and Martha's heart gave a little flutter. It was Henry. She hadn't heard much from him lately, but the conversations they shared now were different. There was no tension, no hidden agenda. "Mom," he said, his voice warm but thoughtful, "I've been thinking about everything. I get it now. I see you. I'm sorry for how we treated you." Martha's chest tightened, but this time the words didn't carry the same weight they once had. She had already forgiven, not because they asked, but because she had chosen to move forward. "Thank you, Henry," she said, her voice steady, "but my life is mine now. I'm living it for me." A few days later, Susan reached out, hesitant but genuine. "Martha," she said, her voice careful, "I've been thinking. I'm sorry for pushing you. We've been wrong." Martha listened, but she didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to hear apologies anymore. She had learned to live without them. "It's not about apologies, Susan," she said finally. "It's about respect. I've made my choice and I'm not turning back." Susan's silence was enough. There was no argument, no further attempt to change Martha's mind. The power had shifted and Martha was no longer the one defending herself. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Martha continued her art, worked on plans for her shop, and spent time with the community group. She didn't need the approval of her family anymore to live a life she was proud of. As the sun set that evening, Martha stood at her window looking out at the horizon. She was finally free. The house, still hers, felt more like home than ever before. She had reclaimed her life and now it was time to build her future step by step on her own terms. Her heart was light, her spirit strong, and for the first time in a long while, Martha was exactly where she was meant to be. Martha stood at the window, the familiar view of her home stretching out before her. The soft light of the evening sun cast long shadows across the yard, and the quiet hum of the world outside felt like a comforting backdrop to the peace that had settled in her heart. The house, once a battleground of emotions and unspoken expectations, now felt like a sanctuary, a reflection of the woman she had become. Her fingers lightly brushed the windowsill as she took in the details of the familiar landscape. The trees in the yard were older now, their branches heavy with the weight of time, just as the house itself had grown into something she could call her own. The years had shaped her, molded her, but it was this place, this house, that had witnessed every step of her journey, every small victory, and every painful decision that had led her here. Martha's thoughts wandered back to the days when she had felt trapped, when her family's expectations had suffocated her, when she had felt as though her life wasn't truly hers. The rocking chair they had given her, a gift meant to push her into a smaller, quieter life, had been the final catalyst. It wasn't just a chair, it was a symbol of everything they thought they could take from her. And yet, it was that very chair that had given her the strength to reclaim herself. The past few months had been filled with moments of quiet triumph, of slowly rebuilding the life she had always wanted. The legal battles, the family strife, the countless small but significant steps all had led to this moment. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Her hands gripped the windowsill, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Martha allowed herself to fully embrace the life she had fought for. The world outside, with its endless possibilities, seemed to shimmer in front of her. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. The road to independence had been long and filled with obstacles, but she had navigated it with strength, grace, and an unshakable determination to live on her own terms. Martha took one last look at the house. It was hers not just in name but in every sense of the word. The house was her sanctuary, filled with memories of a life lived fully, a life that was hers and hers alone. The walls whispered of battles fought and won, of the quiet victories she had achieved when no one was looking. But now the house was more than just a refuge, it was a symbol of everything she had reclaimed. And with that, Martha turned away from the window, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She was ready for whatever came next. The world was at her feet and she was no longer afraid to walk into it. She had walked this journey alone, but she had become the woman she had always been meant to be. She was not just a mother, not just a daughter, not just a woman fighting for her place. She was Martha Wilkes, and she had claimed her independence, her strength, and her future. You gave me a chair to rock in, I gave you back my independence. And with that, Martha stepped into her future, her heart lig. HT, her spirit free.